Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we are opening up a stack of research that is, well, frankly, it's going to make you a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We're looking at files that force you to question the architecture of your own mind, and then, immediately after, the architecture of the global economy.
It is a jarring combination, to say the least. Usually when we do these dives, we're looking at a specific field, biotech, history, AI.
A single discipline.
Exactly. Today, we're looking at a specific person who claims to bridge two fields that have absolutely no business talking to each other.
And those are?
Dark psychology and macroeconomic theory. We're talking about Sam Vaknin.
And polarizing just doesn't quite cover it. I mean, on one hand, you have the author of Malignant Self-Love, which is basically the Bible for anyone trying to understand narcissism.
Right, the pop psychology side.
But then you look at his CV, and he's a published researcher, a former financial editor, and an economic advisor to governments in transition. It's a lot.
It creates this very specific, very strange Venn diagram. And the mission for this deep dive, really, is to see if we can merge those two circles.
Okay.
We're not just going to list his theories. We are going to explore how Vaknin views the entire world through one single unifying lens.
Which is psychology.
Yeah, all of it is psychology. We're going to see how he takes concepts like cold therapy and cold empathy. I mean, these are terms you'd usually reserve for serial killers or the severely personality disordered. And he applies them directly to the stock market.
It's a roadmap that starts in the psychiatrist's chair and it ends in a central bank.
Pretty much. We've got a lot to unpack, especially this idea that corruption might actually be the most rational thing a human being can do.
But that one is going to ruffle some feathers.
So.
I'm sure. But let's start with the psychology track. Most people probably know Vaknin as the YouTube narcissist, the guy who sits in front of the camera and just dissects his own disorder. But the source material we have today, papers from journals I barely heard of, it shows a shift. He's trying to formalize all this.
Yeah.
And his big opening salvo is that we are defining narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, completely wrong.
Right. If you open the DSM, the standard diagnostic manual NPD is a personality disorder. It's defined by traits. Grandiosity, need for admiration, a lack of empathy.
It's seen as a character flaw. You're arrogant, so you're a narcissist.
Exactly. Vaknin's academic work, especially his 2018 research, argues that this is just superficial. He says NPD isn't a personality issue, it's a post-traumatic condition.
He calls it arrested development. But I want to be clear on what that means technically. We're not just talking about someone acting childish.
No, it's much more literal than that. Vaknin argues that because of severe early childhood abuse or trauma, the child's psychological evolution just stops. It halts.
Okay.
The true self, the vulnerable, authentic part of the child, goes into a coma, effectively. So to survive the abuse, the child has to invent a false self.
And the false self is?
It's a godlike, invulnerable construct. It's a piece of fiction that can interact with the world without getting hurt.
So the adult you're talking to, the narcissist, isn't a person with an ego problem. In Vaknin's model, there is simulation.
A construct, yeah. He argues that the person you see is just a firewall. And it's protecting a traumatized child who never grew up past the age of, say, 4 or 5.
And because he frames this as trauma, he argues the treatment has to change. Which brings us to cold therapy.
Right.
I highlighted this section because the name itself sounds, unethical. Cold therapy. Conventional therapy is about support, building a safe space. This sounds like the opposite.
It is the opposite, and this is where the controversy really kicks in. Vaknin argues that traditional talk therapy, CBT or psychodynamic, it often fails with narcissists.
Why?
Because the narcissist is a master manipulator. They'll just charm the therapist or confabulate. We'll get to that. They'll make things up just to win the session. Therapy becomes another source of attention.
So the therapist just becomes part of the problem.
Exactly. They become supply. So Vaknin proposes cold therapy, and the premise is based on this concept of re-traumatization.
He says, to fix the bone, you have to re-break it.
That's the idea. The therapy involves placing the patient in a controlled, hostile environment that mimics the original childhood trauma.
Wait, you intentionally re-traumatize the patient? I mean, that sounds incredibly dangerous.
The sources are clear that it's a controlled environment, but yes, the goal is to dismantle that false self. You have to prove to the narcissist that their godlike defense mechanism no longer works.
You force them to hit rock bottom.
So that the false self fractures and they're forced to finally confront the original wound, the true self.
It's like psychological chemotherapy. You're poisoning the system to kill the cancer, hoping the patient survives it.
That is a very, very apt metaphor. He claims this makes their defenses obsolete, but naturally in the clinical community, it's viewed with extreme skepticism. It borders on adversarial.
It also requires a therapist who can detach completely. Which brings us to another term that Vaknin coined, one I found, frankly, terrifying: cold empathy.
This is such a crucial distinction if you want to understand how these individuals operate, and as we'll see later, how certain corporations operate, you have to get this.
We tend to think of empathy as one thing.
Right, as a blanket term for being a good person. Vaknin says no, we need to split it.
Into cognitive and emotional empathy.
Correct. Emotional empathy is what you and I hopefully experience. If I tell you my dog died, you feel a little pang of sadness. You resonate with my pain. It's visceral.
Right, I feel it with you.
Cognitive empathy is just data processing. It's the ability to look at you, analyze your facial microexpressions, hear your tone of voice, and conclude, subject is sad. But the person observing feels absolutely nothing. It's purely intellectual.
The sources use the metaphor of X-ray vision here.
Yes. Vaknin describes the narcissist and the psychopath as predators. They have extremely high cognitive empathy. They scan you. They know exactly what you're feeling, sometimes better than you do.
But they don't use that data to connect.
No, they use it to calibrate their manipulation.
So when a narcissist seems like they're being understanding, or they say exactly the right thing, it's not because they care. It's because they've run the algorithm and they know which button to push.
Precisely. It is all for the extraction of supply. Adoration, money, sex, power. They use cold empathy to get those things. It's a tool.
That creates a really disturbing picture. You're interacting with someone who's running a simulation of a human being to get what they want.
Yes.
But this brings up the whole issue of truth.
Yeah.
One of the biggest complaints about narcissists is the lying. They lie about big things, small things, things that just don't matter.
Yeah.
But Vaknin has a paper that says they aren't actually lying.
This is the theory of dissociation and confabulation. And this might be the most difficult concept for us to grasp because it just defies our logic. Vaknin argues that when a narcissist tells you something that isn't true, they aren't necessarily lying in the sense of a conscious deception.
How can it not be deception if it's false?
Because of something he calls the grandiosity gap. Let's say a narcissist applies for a job and they get rejected. That reality, I was rejected, conflicts with their false self, which says, I am perfect and everyone wants me.
Right. It creates an internal conflict.
A tolerable one. So the mind performs what he calls a memory erasure.
We just delete the rejection.
Literally. They dissociate from the memory. But now there's a hole in the timeline, right? So the brain instantly invents a bridge. They might come home and say, oh, I turned down the job. They couldn't afford me.
That's the confabulation.
Yes. And here's the kicker. They believe it. In that moment, the neural pathways literally rewrite reality. They can pass polygraph tests because subjectively to them, they are telling the truth.
So you can't catch them in a lie because they've already gaslit themselves first.
Exactly. You are not arguing with a liar. You are arguing with a delusion that has overwritten reality.
Okay, before we pivot to how on earth this applies to the economy, we need to address the elephant in the room with these sources. You mentioned they're academic journals, but they aren't exactly the Lancet.
No. That's an important context note for this deep dive. We're looking at journals like SciFortune or Herald Scholarly Open Access. In the hierarchy of academia, these are often considered pay-to-play or, lower tier journals.
So they're peer-reviewed, but maybe not with the same rigor.
Correct. So why should we pay attention to them?
That's my question.
Because Vaknin operates as an outsider. His work is rejected by the mainstream psychoanalytic community because it's too radical, and frankly because he himself is a diagnosed narcissist. But his work has found this massive, valid audience in the survivor community. And among trauma-informed clinicians, he is providing a vocabulary words like cold empathy that the standard textbooks just missed.
He's reporting from inside the burning building.
He's the virus explaining how the virus works. You don't ignore that data just because it wasn't published in the Harvard Review.
Fair point. Okay, now let's make that shift, because if you think cold therapy is intense, wait until you hear how he applies this brain architecture to the global economy.
Right.
Vaknin wasn't just a psychologist. In the late 90s, he was an economic advisor to the government of Macedonia.
He was, yeah. He was basically the chief editor of their chaotic transition from communism to capitalism in the Balkans. He even mentored a former prime minister, Nikola Gruevski. He saw the collapse of a massive ideology firsthand.
And his core thesis in his economic papers is that we're doing economics all wrong.
He argues that economics tries so hard to be physics. It tries to use math to predict human behavior. But Vaknin says the fundamental unit of the economy is not the dollar. It's not a unit of production.
It's the human transaction.
And humans are irrational. They're emotional. They're traumatized.
So if you can't use math, what is the engine of the economy?
The trust mechanism. Vaknin argues the entire global economy is a hallucination. It's a story shared by billions of people. We exchange paper and digital bits because we trust they have value. We trust the bank will give us our money.
And when that trust breaks,
the hallucination ends. The economy doesn't just slow down, it evaporates. He saw this in the Balkans. When trust in the state collapsed, the currency became worthless toilet paper in a matter of days.
Which leads to his concept of signaling. He says prices aren't real values.
Right. In standard economics, price is where supply meets demand. It's a fact. Vaknin says, no, price is a psychological signal. It signals status, scarcity, desire. It's a language between irrational actors.
Like buying a Rolex.
Exactly. You're not buying a device to tell time. You're buying a signal to transmit to everyone else.
This brings us to his book, After the Rain, How the West Lost the East. And in it, he basically blames the West for the economic disasters that followed in Eastern Europe after the Berlin Wall fell.
Oh, it's a scorching critique. He says the West came in with what he calls cookie-cutter capitalism. They showed up and said, okay, Macedonia, here's a stock market, here's a central bank, here's a constitution. Now you're a democracy, go get rich.
It's like trying to install software on a computer that doesn't have the right hardware for it.
That's a perfect analogy. Vaknin argues these countries lacked the psychological infrastructure. They came from 50 years of communism where the state was everything. There was no culture of trust, no history of transparent contracts. You can't just transplant a high-trust system like the New York Stock Exchange onto a low-trust, traumatized society.
And because the software didn't fit, the system crashed.
Right.
Which brings us to his most provocative take, corruption.
Right.
We're all taught corruption is a cancer, it's bad, period. Vaknin says.
Well, hang on.
He reframes it entirely through game theory. In a stable Western democracy, corruption is destructive because the system works. If you pay a bribe, you're cheating.
But in a low-trust transition economy where the courts are broken, the banks steal your money, the police are criminals, corruption becomes a rational choice.
Explain that. How is paying a bribe rational?
Okay, imagine you need a permit to open a small bread shop. The legal way takes 2 years. And maybe it never even happens because some bureaucrat loses your papers. The illegal way paying a bribe takes 2 days and guarantees you open.
So if you want to feed your family.
The corrupt act is the only rational path to survival.
He's saying corruption becomes an efficiency mechanism when the state has failed.
Yes, it bypasses the blockage. And he points to the Hawala system as proof of this.
I've heard of this. It's that informal money transfer system, right? In the Middle East and Asia.
Correct. It's ancient. You give cash to a broker in Beirut. He calls a guy in London, and that guy in London gives cash to your cousin. No wire transfer, no bank record.
And Vaknin's argument is that this is better than Western banking.
In high conflict zones, yes, because it relies entirely on honor. If a Hawala broker steals money, he doesn't just get sued, he loses his reputation forever. He is socially dead. And in a society where legal contracts mean nothing, that personal reputational risk is a much stronger guarantee than a piece of paper.
That's fascinating. He's essentially saying that when the false self of the state collapses, when the government is exposed as a fraud, people revert to these primal trust-based networks just to survive.
Which mirrors his psychology work perfectly. When the narcissist collapses, you're left with the raw, primitive survival mechanisms.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this. We have the psychology of the narcissist, grandiosity, cold empathy, extracting supply. And we have the economics of signals and short-term survival. Vaknin combines them to talk about malignant markets in the modern West.
And this is where the listener should really lean in. Vaknin suggests that modern corporate capitalism is practically designed to select for and reward narcissistic traits. He calls it the corporate psychopath.
We hear that term a lot. Usually it just means, my boss is a jerk.
But Vaknin gives it a structural explanation. Think about the incentives. A public company CEO lives and dies by the quarterly earnings report. They need the stock price to go up now.
That's the supply.
Exactly. The stock price is the narcissistic supply. It validates the false self of the corporation. So the CEO uses cold empathy. They look at the workforce not as people, but as numbers on a spreadsheet to be adjusted. They fire 5,000 people to bump the stock price 2% for the quarterly call.
That is literally the extraction of supply. They are cannibalizing the long-term health of the company, the employees, the R&D, for a short-term hit of validation from the market.
And Vaknin argues this is confabulation on a macro scale. The stock price goes up, so everyone agrees the company is healthy, but the underlying reality, the true self of the company, is rotting away.
So the market is dissociating from reality.
Yes, and just like the narcissist, it believes its own hype. Until the crash.
He also notes this creates a massive divide in the labor market.
Right. He distinguishes between knowledge workers who are mobile, they can play the signaling game, and the traditional workforce who are grounded in physical reality. The gap isn't just income, it's psychological. One group is living in this abstract, globalized, false self economy.
And the other is left behind in the local, tangible reality. Yep. It's disturbing how well the two overlays fit. You start to realize he isn't really talking about two different things at all.
No. Whether he's analyzing a patient in a chair in Skopje or analyzing the Federal Reserve, Vaknin is seeing the same pattern. Trauma leads to a loss of trust. Loss of trust leads to the creation of a false self, a bubble, a delusion. And that delusion needs constant energy supply to maintain itself.
And eventually, the energy runs out.
The mortification happens, the crash, the breakup, reality checks in.
So let's look back at the map we've drawn. We started with cold therapy, this idea that you have to break a person to fix them. We moved to cold empathy, the tool used to simulate humanity to get what you want. And we've ended up looking at a global economic system that might just be one giant confabulating narcissist.
The key takeaway from all these sources is that you cannot separate the spreadsheet from the psyche. Vaknin's whole mission is to show us that psychology isn't just about feelings, it is the operating system of our reality. And if that operating system is infected with trauma, the output, whether it's a marriage or a GDP, is going to be distorted. It really forces you to redefine what rational even means. If you live in a crazy world, acting crazy is the only rational choice.
Precisely. Adaptation looks like madness to an outsider.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. Vaknin tells us the narcissist survives by confabulating, by rewriting reality to avoid the truth. And he tells us our economy relies entirely on trust, a shared belief in the value of things.
Right.
If our modern institutions, our banks, our tech giants, our political parties are rewarding the corporate psychopaths who excel at cold empathy and faking trust, are we building a civilization that is designed to dissociate? Are we living in a confabulated economy that believes its own lies, just like the narcissist in the therapy chair? And the follow-up to that is, when the memory erasure finally fails and the reality of our debt, our resources, our social fractures comes rushing back in, do we have a true self left to handle it? Or have we starved the child to death?
A heavy question for a heavy deep dive. Thanks for going down this rabbit hole with us into the mind of Sam Vaknin. We'll see you next time.